March 4th, 1944. 1:47 p.m., 24,000 feet above Berlin. The cold is absolute. Oberleutnant Heinz Knock can feel it through his leather gloves, through the fleece-lined flight suit, through the layers of wool that separate his skin from the metal frame of his Messerschmitt Bf 109. At this altitude, the cold doesn't just surround you, it invades. It seeps into your bones, slows your thoughts, makes every movement deliberate. He's learned to work with it this cold. 17 aerial victories have taught him to think through the ice, forming at the edges of his oxygen mask. His fighter climbs through crystalline air above the German capital, engine roaring, propeller tearing through thin atmosphere. Below him, Berlin spreads like a grey-brown map, the Spree River threading through countless streets and buildings that look, from up here, like a child's toys. Somewhere down there, people are running for shelters. Air raid sirens are wailing. They've heard this symphony before, so has Knock. This is routine. The Americans are coming with their massive 4-engine bombers, B-17s and B-24s in their tight defensive boxes, bristling with 50 caliber machine guns. They'll arrive any minute now, and Knock knows exactly what will happen next, because it always happens the same way. The American escorts, P-47 Thunderbolts or P-38 Lightnings, will be with them. For a while, flying protective circles around their bombers, keeping German fighters at bay. But Berlin is over 600 miles from American bases in England, 600 miles of occupied France, of the Low Countries, of German homeland. That's over 1,200 miles round trip. No American fighter can make that journey. The escorts will turn back. They always do. The mathematics of fuel consumption and combat radius are merciless, indifferent to bravery or determination. You can't fly farther than your fuel tanks allow. The laws of physics don't negotiate. And when those escorts turn back, when they must turn back, Knock and his squadron mates will attack. What happens in the next 4 minutes will shatter everything Heinz Knock believes about this war. And 94% of people who click away before the 3-minute mark miss the most unbelievable part. The moment when mathematical certainty collides with impossible reality. Don't be one of them. Knock's radio crackles. Indiana approaching from the west. High altitude, large formation. Indiana, the Luftwaffe code for enemy fighters. He scans the western sky, squinting against the brilliant sunlight that turns the scattered clouds into fields of blinding white. The sun is always a problem at altitude. It hides attackers, ruins your vision, burns your eyes even through tinted goggles. Then he sees them. The bomber formation first, a massive aerial armada stretching across miles of sky. The Americans call them combat boxes, stacked formations of heavy bombers designed to maximize overlapping defensive fire. From this distance, they look like a swarm of insects. Dark, specks against pale sky, vapor trails streaming behind them like white ribbons. Knock has seen this before. The sight no longer impresses him, though some part of his mind, the part not yet hardened by 17 kills and 2 years of war, still marvels at the industrial power required to put so many heavy bombers in the air at once. Germany can't do this anymore, can't spare the fuel, can't build the planes fast enough, can't train the crews. But that's a thought for another time. He's looking for the escorts. There, silvery glints above and around the bomber formation, fighter aircraft weaving protective patterns, circling like sheepdogs, guarding their flock. Knock checks his watch. The formation is directly over Berlin now. The escorts should be turning back. They should be checking their fuel gauges, calculating their reserve, beginning the long flight home. But they're not turning. They're still there. Knock blinks, ice forming at the corners of his eyes. He wipes his goggles with a gloved hand, thinking his vision is playing tricks. Oxygen deprivation can cause hallucinations at this altitude. He checks his oxygen feed. It's working fine. The escorts are still there. His radio erupts. They're not turning back. Confirm visual. Are those Mustangs? Over Berlin? That's impossible. Check your fuel calculations. They must be, I'm looking right at them, P-51s, over the city. Noka keys his radio, keeping his voice steady despite the confusion flooding his mind. All aircraft, confirm identification. What are we seeing? The response comes from Lieutenant Fischer, flying 2,000 meters to his north. Herr Oberleutnant, those are P-51 Mustangs, I'm certain. And they're flying like they have fuel to spare. Impossible. The word fills Noak's head like a klaxon. P-51 Mustangs. He knows the aircraft, American fighter, distinctive profile, sleek and fast. Intelligence briefings mention them, but always with the same assessment. Excellent performance, but limited range. Perhaps marginally better than the P-47, but still bound by the same physical laws, still chained to fuel capacity and the cruel mathematics of distance. Before we continue with what Heinz Knoke sees next, drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching this from? Let's see how far this story reaches. From Berlin to London to Texas to Tokyo. We want to hear from you. Berlin is 600 miles from England. Knoke knows this. He's studied the maps, listened to the intelligence officers, heard the calculations repeated so many times they've become gospel. The combat radius of American fighters is well documented. The P-47 Thunderbolt, approximately 475 miles with drop tanks. The P-38 Lightning, similar range. Berlin sits comfortably beyond that radius, protected not by flak guns or fighter squadrons, but by simple, undeniable distance. Yet there they are. He can see them clearly now, the distinctive nose intake of the Mustang, the bubble canopy, the long, graceful wings. They're weaving above the bomber formation in the standard escort pattern, neither hurried nor worried. They're not flying like aircraft at the extreme edge of their fuel range. They're flying like they own this airspace. Knoke counts them, dozens. Maybe more than 100 Mustangs scattered across the sky over Berlin, silvery shapes catching the sun, writing vapor trails across German airspace like signatures, like declarations. His gloved hand tightens on the control stick. His mind races through possibilities, searching for an explanation that makes sense. Perhaps they're on a one-way mission? Suicide fighters planning to crash land or bail out over Germany? But no. He watches a Mustang accelerate to intercept a Bf-109 diving toward the bombers. The American fighter moves with the confidence of a pilot who has fuel for maneuvering, for combat, for the long flight home. Perhaps German intelligence was wrong about the specifications. But Luftwaffe intelligence doesn't make mistakes like this. Not about something so fundamental. They have captured aircraft, detailed reports, engineering analysis. You can't hide an aircraft's fuel capacity. You can't fake combat radius. Perhaps the laws of physics have changed. Knoke almost laughs at that thought, except nothing about this moment is funny. He's witnessing the impossible made real. Below him, Berlin spreads across the landscape, the capital of the Third Reich, the city he's sworn to defend. For months, it's been protected by mathematics, by the simple fact that American fighters couldn't reach this far. That protection has just evaporated. The radio continues its chaotic chatter, pilots reporting Mustang sightings, confused questions, disbelief layered over static. Knoke hears the fear underneath the professional language. They all understand what this means, even if no one wants to say it aloud. If the Americans can bring fighters to Berlin, they can bring fighters anywhere in Germany. There is no safe distance anymore, no place where the bombers will be unescorted and vulnerable. The entire German fighter strategy, wait for the escorts to leave, then attack, has just collapsed. Knoke watches a P-51 slide past 500 meters below him, pilot invisible behind the glint of the canopy. The American doesn't see him, focused on a different threat. The Mustang's engine sings a different note than German fighters, higher pitched, smoother. The sound of a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. British engine in an American airframe. He'd heard about this combination in intelligence briefings, dismissed it, like everyone else, as exaggerated claims. Allied propaganda designed to intimidate. But propaganda doesn't fly. Propaganda doesn't write vapor trails across the sky above your capital city. This is real. Heinz Knoke takes a deep breath of cold, metallic oxygen and prepares to engage an enemy that shouldn't exist. In a battle he suddenly understands cannot be won. The impossible has arrived over Berlin. And everything has changed. To understand why Heinz Knoke felt like he was witnessing a violation of natural law, you have to understand the air war over Europe in early 1944. It was a war governed by mathematics. The United States Army Air Forces had been flying daylight bombing raids over occupied Europe since August 1942. The theory was beautiful in its simplicity. Massive formations of heavily armed bombers would fly deep into German territory in broad daylight, destroy industrial targets with precision bombing, and fight their way home through coordinated defensive fire. No need for inaccurate nighttime raids like the British RAF flew. American bombers would win the war through superior firepower and tight formation discipline. The reality was written in blood across the skies of Europe. Unescorted bombers, no matter how heavily armed, no matter how tight their formations, died in horrifying numbers. German fighters would attack from the sun, from head-on, from below. They'd develop tactics specifically designed to break up bomber formations, isolate individual aircraft, and slaughter them at leisure. The B-17 Flying Fortress earned its name, but fortresses fall when surrounded and hammered long enough. On October 14, 1943, a raid on Schweinfurt lost 60 bombers out of 291 dispatched, a 20% loss rate. At that rate of attrition, entire bomber groups would be wiped out in 5 missions. Crews would be dead before completing their required 25 mission tours. The mathematics were unsustainable. The solution was obvious. Fighter escorts. The problem was range. In 1943 and early 1944, the USAAF had 2 primary escort fighters, the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-38 Lightning. Both were formidable aircraft, fast, heavily armed, capable of fighting the best Germany could field. The P-47 was a massive, rugged beast that could take punishment and keep flying. The P-38, with its distinctive twin-boom design, could climb and dive with the best German fighters, but neither could fly to Berlin and back. The P-47 Thunderbolt, even with auxiliary drop tanks, had a combat radius of approximately 475 miles. The P-38 Lightning could manage roughly 450 miles. Combat radius isn't total range, it's how far you can fly out, engage in combat, which burns fuel at an enormous rate, and still make it home. These numbers were hard physical limits determined by fuel tank capacity, engine consumption rates, and the immutable fact that aircraft don't glide 600 miles when they run out of fuel. Berlin sat 600 miles from American bomber bases in England. The mathematics were clear. Berlin was unreachable for American fighter escorts. German fighter commanders understood this perfectly. They'd built their entire defensive strategy around it. The tactic was brutally efficient. When American bombers approached with their fighter escorts, German fighters would track them on radar, scramble, and climb to altitude. But they wouldn't immediately attack. They'd shadow the formation, staying just out of range, waiting for the mathematical certainty that governed aerial warfare. Eventually, always, inevitably, the American escorts would reach their fuel limit. They'd make one last protective sweep, waggle their wings in a gesture of farewell the bomber crews had learned to dread, and turn for home. The pilots had no choice. Stay too long and you'd run out of fuel over enemy territory, a death sentence. The moment the escorts departed, German fighters would attack. Without fighter protection, bomber formations became target practice. Oh, the bombers fought back. Their 50 caliber machine guns could shred a fighter that got too close, and a tight formation could put up a deadly crossfire. But fighters were faster, more maneuverable, and could choose when and where to engage. German pilots would make slashing attacks, breaking up formations, then focusing on isolated bombers. It was systematic slaughter. This pattern had repeated across dozens of missions, hundreds of bomber losses, thousands of dead aircrew. The closer the target to Berlin, the longer the bombers flew unescorted, the worse the losses became. German intelligence tracked American escort capabilities obsessively. They knew the specifications of every American fighter. They knew fuel capacities, engine consumption rates, the range improvement provided by drop tanks. Luftwaffe intelligence officers produced detailed charts showing the escort-free zones deep in German territory. Berlin sat comfortably in the centre of that zone. The German capital, symbolic heart of the Third Reich, administrative centre of the Nazi Empire, was protected by 600 miles of distance, as effectively as by any ring of steel. American bombers could reach Berlin. Yes, they had the range, but they'd have to run a gauntlet of German fighters over hundreds of miles without protection. The mathematics made Berlin nearly invulnerable to daylight precision bombing. German fighter pilots knew this. They'd been briefed on it. They'd flown missions that proved it repeatedly. When the klaxon sounded for a raid approaching Berlin, there was no panic. Just the routine: scramble, climb to altitude, wait for the escorts to turn back, attack. It was as predictable as sunrise. Heinz Knoke had flown this pattern a dozen times. He'd seen the American P-47s or P-38s bank away, heading west, leaving their bombers naked in hostile skies. He'd felt the cold satisfaction of watching an enemy bound by the same physical laws that bound everyone. You couldn't cheat fuel consumption. You couldn't negotiate with an empty tank. The laws of physics were the Luftwaffe's most reliable ally. In December 1943, intelligence reports began mentioning increased numbers of P-51 Mustangs in England. The analysis noted it was an excellent fighter aircraft, manoeuvrable, fast, well-armed. Some reports claimed it had exceptional range. The claims were dismissed. German intelligence had examined, captured American fighters. They'd studied engine specifications, calculated fuel consumption, measured tank capacities. The idea that any single-engine fighter could escort bombers to Berlin and back seemed like obvious propaganda. The Americans were trying to intimidate German pilots, to make them hesitate before attacking. It wouldn't work. Numbers don't lie. Engineering doesn't deceive. A fighter aircraft's range is determined by cold, hard mathematics. Fuel capacity divided by consumption rate, modified for altitude and combat power settings. Berlin was 600 miles away. No American fighter could reach it. This was settled fact, confirmed by engineering analysis, proven by months of combat experience, as certain as gravity, as reliable as dawn, until March 4, 1944. Until Heinz Knoke looked up and saw silvery P-51 Mustangs weaving protective circles over Berlin itself, flying with the casual confidence of aircraft that had fuel to spare. The pattern that never failed had just failed. The mathematics had changed, and every German fighter pilot in the sky above Berlin felt the same cold realization settle over them like ice. If the Americans can bring fighters here, they can bring fighters anywhere. There were no safe zones anymore. Heinz Knoke was not a fanatic. This is important to understand. He wasn't a rabid ideologue, wasn't a party zealot, wasn't the kind of man who believed in victory through will alone. He was 22 years old in March 1944, born in Hameln. Yes, the same town from the Pied Piper legend. And he'd grown up the son of a school teacher who valued rational thought and education. Before the war, Knoke had studied to be an engineer. Engineering teaches you to trust numbers, to believe in specifications, in calculations, in the cold certainty of physics and mathematics. You can't build a bridge through ideology. You can't make an engine run on propaganda. The universe operates according to laws that don't care about your politics or your passion. This mindset made Knoke an excellent fighter pilot. He approached aerial combat like an engineering problem: energy management, angles of attack, rate of closure, deflection shooting. He calculated rather than guessed. By March 1944, he had 17 confirmed aerial victories. 17 times he'd solved the mathematical problem of putting his aircraft and his guns in the right place at the right time. 17 enemy aircraft destroyed through calculation and skill. He kept a diary throughout the war, meticulously recording his missions, his thoughts, his observations. The diary of a man who believed in documentation, in evidence, in the written record. Years later, that diary would become a published memoir, one of the most detailed first-hand accounts of the air war from the German perspective. But on March 4, 1944, Heinz Knoke was simply a young Oberleutnant who trusted his training, trusted his intelligence briefings, and trusted the numbers that said Berlin was beyond the range of American fighter escorts. The numbers had never lied to him before. If Knoke represented the frontline fighter pilot who trusted the system, Adolf Galland embodied the system itself. General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland, Inspector of Fighters for the entire Luftwaffe. At 32 years old, he was one of the youngest generals in the German military, and he'd earned it. 104 aerial victories on the Western Front, Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords. A pilot so skilled that even his enemies respected him. But Galland's real genius wasn't just in the cockpit, it was in understanding the broader strategic picture. He'd been appointed Inspector of Fighters in November 1941, responsible for organising and directing the defence of German airspace. It was a massive job, coordinating thousands of fighters, dozens of squadrons, managing pilot training, aircraft production, tactical doctrine, and strategic deployment. He reported directly to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, which was often more curse than blessing. Galland approached the job like the engineering problem it was. He studied American bomber formations, analysed attack patterns, calculated loss ratios. He knew that the Luftwaffe couldn't match American industrial production. The United States was building bombers, and fighters faster than Germany could shoot them down. The only way to win was through tactical efficiency, maximize American losses while minimizing German casualties. The strategy he'd helped develop was elegant in its simplicity. Use Germany's interior lines of communication to concentrate fighters at threatened points, use radar to track incoming raids, and, most critically, exploit the fundamental limitation of American fighter escorts: range. American fighters had to turn back. Physics demanded it. And when they did, concentrated German fighter formations would attack the unprotected bombers. The goal was to make the losses so severe that the Americans would abandon daylight bombing entirely, as the British had been forced to do. The strategy was working. The October 1943 Schweinfurt raid had lost 60 bombers, a devastating blow that forced the Americans to suspend deep penetration raids for months. German fighter pilots were achieving kill ratios that would have seemed impossible in the early war. The Americans had numbers, but Germany had position and the mathematical advantage of fighting over home territory against range-limited enemies. Galland knew the specifications of every American aircraft. He'd personally examined captured P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings. He'd reviewed the intelligence reports, studied the engineering analyses, calculated the fuel consumption rates himself. He knew, with the certainty of an engineer, with the confidence of 104 aerial victories, with the authority of the Luftwaffe's top fighter commander, that no American single-engine fighter could escort bombers to Berlin and return to England. It was impossible, not difficult, not unlikely, impossible. In late 1943, intelligence reports began mentioning the P-51 Mustang in increasing numbers. Galland read the reports carefully. The aircraft had an interesting history. Originally designed to a British specification, powered by an American Allison engine, it had shown promise but disappointing high-altitude performance. Then the British had fitted it with a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same engine that powered the Spitfire. The combination transformed the aircraft. Intelligence reports showed impressive performance, speed over 440 mph, excellent maneuverability, good armament. Some reports claimed exceptional range, but the numbers seemed exaggerated. Allied propaganda often inflated performance specifications to intimidate German pilots. Galland ran the calculations himself. A single-engine fighter carrying enough fuel to fly 600 miles, fight a battle, and fly 600 miles back would need enormous fuel capacity. That much fuel meant weight. Weight reduced performance, reduced maneuverability, made the aircraft vulnerable in combat. The engineering trade-offs didn't make sense. Either the range claims were false, or the P-51 sacrificed so much performance for range that it would be easy prey in combat. The intelligence assessment was clear. The P-51 Mustang was a capable fighter for medium-range escort work, but it couldn't reach Berlin, not with enough fuel reserve to be combat effective. Galland trusted this assessment because it was based on engineering reality, not optimistic propaganda. He'd built his defensive strategy on such assessments. German fighters were concentrated at bases within range of likely American bomber targets. Radar stations tracked incoming raids. Fighter controllers vectored interceptors to shadow the bomber streams. And everyone waited for the mathematical certainty. The American escorts would reach their fuel limit and turn back. Then the real battle would begin. This wasn't hope or faith or ideology. This was engineering. This was physics. This was the kind of certain knowledge that allowed you to build strategies, to deploy resources, to fight a war against an enemy with vastly superior industrial capacity. Germany couldn't outproduce America, but Germany could outthink them, outposition them, and exploit the fundamental limitations of physics that bound everyone equally. Galland was a realist. He knew Germany was losing the war in many ways. The Eastern Front was a bleeding wound. Allied armies were massing in England for an inevitable invasion. German cities were being pounded by British night bombing. But the air over Germany, that could be defended. That was being defended. American daylight bombing losses were severe enough to question the entire strategy. Give it a few more months of those loss rates, and the Americans might abandon daylight precision bombing entirely. Germany just needed to hold on, to make the cost too high, to exploit every advantage, including the simple fact that Berlin was 600 miles from England, too far for American fighters to reach. On the morning of March 4, 1944, Adolf Galland was at Luftwaffe headquarters, reviewing reports and coordinating the defense against the expected American raid. He wasn't in a cockpit anymore. His command responsibilities kept him on the ground most days, though he still flew combat missions when he could steal the time. He'd read the morning intelligence briefing, large American bomber formation assembling over England, likely target Berlin or other central German cities. Fighter squadrons were on alert. The response would be standard: track the formation, wait for escorts to depart, concentrate fighters for the attack. Routine, predictable, governed by the mathematics that had never failed. Heinz Knock, climbing to altitude in his Bf-109, trusted the system that Galland had built. Galland, reading reports at headquarters, trusted the engineering calculations that said Berlin was safe. Both men were about to learn that the impossible doesn't care about your calculations. The answer to an impossible problem was being built 3,700 miles away, in a factory in Inglewood, California. North American aviation had never built a fighter aircraft before 1940. They manufactured trainers, reliable, unglamorous aircraft that taught pilots the basics. But in April 1940, the British Purchasing Commission approached them with an urgent request. Britain was fighting for its life, desperately needed fighters, and American production capacity was the only hope. Could North American design and build a new fighter aircraft? The company said yes. Then they asked, how much time do we have? The British answer, 120 days to first prototype. It was an insane timeline. Fighter aircraft took years to develop, not months. But these weren't normal times. France was collapsing. The Luftwaffe was preparing to attack Britain. Normal development schedules were a luxury the world couldn't afford. North American's chief designer, Edgar Schmuerd, led a team that worked around the clock. They studied every fighter design they could find: British Spitfires, German Bf-109s, American P-40s. They identified what worked, what failed, what could be improved. They made decisions in hours that would normally take months of committee reviews. 102 days later, the first prototype was complete. They called it the Mustang. The NA-73X first flew on October 26, 1940. Test pilots loved it immediately. Smooth handling, excellent visibility from the bubble canopy, stable gun platform, fast. On paper, it looked like a world beater. Top speed over 308 km/h. Long range, heavily armed. But there was a problem. The Allison V1710 engine, while reliable, lost power at high altitude. Above 15,000 feet, where bomber escorts needed to operate, the Mustang's performance fell off dramatically. It was a superb low-altitude fighter, perfect for ground attack and reconnaissance work, but as a high-altitude bomber escort it was inadequate. The RAF used early Mustangs for low-level tactical reconnaissance. The USAAF showed limited interest. By 1942, the P-51 Mustang seemed destined to be a footnote, a competent aircraft that arrived too late and couldn't quite do the job that mattered most. Then a British test pilot named Ronnie Harker flew a Mustang and had an idea. Harker worked for Rolls-Royce, the company that built the legendary Merlin engine, the powerful, supercharged V-12 that powered Spitfires and Lancaster bombers. He'd seen what the Merlin could do at high altitude, and flying the Mustang, he recognized an exceptional airframe hampered by an inadequate engine. What if you combined the two? The Merlin-powered Mustang first flew in October 1942. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Top speed jumped to 440 millimeters. But more importantly, high-altitude performance was extraordinary. The Mustang could now operate effectively above 30,000 feet, exactly where heavy bombers needed protection. And then engineers noticed something else: fuel efficiency. The Merlin engine, supercharged and optimized for high altitude, sipped fuel compared to other American fighters. The P-47 Thunderbolt was a magnificent fighter, but its massive radial engine drank fuel voraciously. The Mustang's inline Merlin was far more economical. Combine efficient fuel consumption with the Mustang's large internal fuel capacity, add external drop tanks that could be jettisoned when empty, and suddenly you had numbers that seemed impossible. Internal fuel, 269 gallons. Two 75-gallon drop tanks, 150 gallons. Total capacity, 419 gallons. The math was startling. At economical cruise settings, the Merlin-powered P-51 could fly over 2,000 miles total range. Combat radius, accounting for combat power settings, fighting and fuel reserves, was over 650 miles. Berlin was 600 miles from England. American planners stared at the numbers, checked them again, then started asking a different question. What if we could escort bombers all the way to Berlin? The strategic implications were staggering. For 2 years, the USAF had been limited to targets within P-47 and P-38 range. Deep targets in Germany, ball-bearing factories, aircraft plants, oil refineries, could only be hit by unescorted bombers that took catastrophic losses. But if the P-51 could really reach Berlin, there would be nowhere in Germany beyond American reach. The entire Reich would be vulnerable to precision daylight bombing. German industry couldn't be dispersed beyond escort range because there was no beyond escort range anymore. The 354th Fighter Group received the first P-51Bs in November 1943. Pilots transitioned from P-47s and were stunned by the difference. The Mustang was lighter, more responsive, climbed faster, and the fuel gauges seemed to drop in slow motion compared to the thirsty Thunderbolt. Initial combat reports were excellent. The P-51 could outturn, outclimb, and outrun most German fighters, and it could do so while flying escort missions deep into Germany. By February 1944, more P-51 groups were operational. The numbers kept improving as pilots learned to manage fuel efficiently, as drop tank supply increased, as tactical procedures were refined. Someone at 8th Air Force Headquarters asked the inevitable question, can we reach Berlin? The math said yes, but mathematics on paper and combat reality were different things. Fuel consumption calculations assumed optimal conditions, steady cruise, no combat, no emergency maneuvers. Real combat was chaotic. Fighters burned fuel at enormous rates during dogfights. Get into a turning fight with a Bf-109 and you could drain your tanks in minutes, and there were 1,000 ways to die between England and Berlin. Mechanical failures, weather, navigation errors, getting shot down. If you ran out of fuel over Germany, you were dead or captured. There was no margin for error. The mission planners calculated and recalculated. They built in safety margins, planned fuel checkpoints, worked out emergency procedures. The numbers held up. It was theoretically possible. On March 3, 1944, the decision was made. The next major raid on Berlin would have P-51 escort all the way to the target and back. The mission briefing for fighter pilots was straightforward. Escort the bombers to Berlin. Stay with them over the target. Bring them home. Some pilots thought it was a mistake. Berlin was 600 miles away. Everyone knew American fighters couldn't reach that far. The briefing officers must have meant they'd escort part way, farther than before, but surely not all the way to Berlin itself. The officers repeated, all the way to Berlin. That's the mission. Across the English Channel, German intelligence was receiving reports of increased P-51 activity. Luftwaffe analysts noted the appearance of this fighter in growing numbers. Some captured documents and prisoner interrogations suggested the Americans believed the P-51 could reach Berlin. The intelligence assessment was skeptical. The Allies had made exaggerated claims before. During the Battle of Britain, both sides inflated victory claims and minimized losses. Propaganda was part of warfare. The Americans might genuinely believe their new fighter could reach Berlin, but belief didn't change physics. German engineers examined all available data on the P-51. Yes, it appeared to be an excellent aircraft. Yes, it seemed to have better range than the P-47 or P-38. But the idea that a single-engine fighter could escort bombers to Berlin, engage in combat, and return to England required fuel capacity that seemed implausible for an aircraft of that size. Either the range claims were exaggerated or the P-51 achieved that range by carrying so much fuel it sacrificed combat effectiveness. The assessment remained. Berlin was beyond effective escort range. This assessment was distributed to fighter commanders, to Galen's headquarters, to the frontline squadrons. When American raids approached, German pilots were briefed on what to expect. Escorts would turn back before reaching central Germany. It had happened dozens of times. The pattern was reliable. On the morning of March 4, 1944, German radar stations detected a large American formation assembling over England. Fighter squadrons from Berlin, Brunswick and Magdeburg were put on alert. No one expected anything different from every other raid. The Americans would come. Their escorts would turn back. German fighters would attack. Routine. Except 200 miles to the west, hundreds of P-51 Mustangs were climbing to altitude, drop tanks full, Merlin engines singing their high-pitched song, flying toward Berlin with enough fuel to stay and fight. The impossible was about to become real. 1:52 p.m., 5 minutes after first visual contact. Heinz Knoke pushes his control stick forward, diving toward the bomber formation. His wingman, Feldwebel Bauer, stays tight on his port side. Below them, the American B-17s maintain their rigid formation. 4 engine behemoths painted in olive drab and grey, each one bristling with gun positions. But Knoke isn't focused on the bombers. He's watching the P-51s. They're everywhere, weaving above the formation in a high cover patrol, flanking the bombers on both sides. Some are flying lower, clearly positioned to counter exactly the kind of diving attack Knoke is attempting. His radio crackles with confusion layered over static. They're still here, over the city. How is this possible? Must be a short raid. They'll have to leave immediately. Negative. They're maneuvering for combat. They're not conserving fuel. Has anyone seen them drop tanks? That last question makes Knoke glance at the nearest Mustang, about 800 meters distant. Yes, he can see the aircraft is flying clean now. No external tanks visible. They've already dropped them. Standard procedure: carry extra fuel in disposable external tanks. Drop them before combat to reduce weight and drag. Which means these P-51s flew to Berlin with drop tanks, dropped them, and are now prepared to fight. The fuel calculation runs through Knoke's engineering-trained mind automatically. If they flew here on drop tanks and still have internal fuel for combat and the return trip, then their total range is impossible. The number is impossible. No time to think about it now. He's committed to the attack. Knoke rolls his Bf-109 into a steeper dive. Building speed angles toward a B-17 on the edge of the formation. The standard tactic: slash through at high speed, fire a burst, keep going. Don't get slow. Don't give the bomber gunners an easy target. Don't stay in the killing zone of overlapping defensive fire. He's 2,000 meters out when a P-51 turns toward him. The Mustang rolls with a grace that seems almost lazy, but Knoke recognizes the efficiency of the movement. The American pilot has seen him, calculated the geometry, and is moving to intercept. Not rushing, not panicked, just smoothly, repositioning like a chess player who sees the board 3 moves ahead. Knoke has a choice: continue the attack on the bomber and likely get the American on his tail, or engage the P-51 directly. He chooses the bomber. He has speed advantage, and Bauer should cover him. The B-17 grows rapidly in his gun sight. He can see the nose art now, a cartoon character he doesn't recognize painted on the fuselage. Can see the gun positions, the plexiglass nose, the propellers chopping through thin air. Tracers reach out toward him. The gunners have seen him, are firing, strings of glowing bullets arcing through the sky. Knoke ignores the tracers. You can't dodge individual bullets. You fly your attack profile and trust speed and angle to protect you. His finger tightens on the trigger. The Bf-109 shudders as the nose-mounted cannon and machine guns fire. 3 seconds of sustained fire, spent cannon shells ejecting, tracers walking toward the bomber, impacts sparking along the B-17's wing. Then the P-51 is there. Knoke doesn't see it arrive. One moment he's focused on the bomber, the next moment his peripheral vision catches the distinctive silhouette cutting across his flight path, and his combat instincts scream danger. He brakes hard left, pulling the stick into his lap, G-forces slamming him down into his seat. The horizon spins. His vision greys at the edges, not enough to black out, but enough that he's riding the edge of his aircraft's performance and his body's tolerance. The P-51 follows and stays with him. Knoke is in a turning fight now, exactly what you don't want at altitude over enemy territory. Turning fights burn fuel and energy. They're unpredictable, chaotic, and often end with someone making a fatal mistake. He reverses his turn, rolling right, trying to create separation. The Mustang rolls with him. Knoke can see the pilot now, leather helmet, oxygen mask, focused on pursuit. The American is good, not just competent, but skilled, flying smoothly, managing energy, staying in position, and the Mustang turns inside him. This isn't supposed to happen. The Bf-109 should have the advantage in sustained turns, especially at this altitude. But the P-51 is matching him, degree for degree, and slowly gaining position. Noak's fuel gauge shows he's burned through a quarter of his fuel already. The combat has been less than 3 minutes. At this rate, he'll hit his reserve limit in 10 minutes, and he's over Berlin, which means he needs fuel to get back to base. The American apparently has no such concerns. The P-51 continues turning, continues pressing. The pilot is fighting like someone who has fuel to burn, literally. No fuel anxiety, no conservative manoeuvring, just aggressive, confident flying. Noak's radio erupts. "I'm hit, engines smoking. 2 Mustangs on me, can't shake them. Where did they all come from? Brake right, Klaus, brake right." The radio chatter tells a story of chaos and confusion. German fighters are scattered across the sky, engaged in individual dogfights, the coordinated attack falling apart into a sprawling furball of individual combats. And everywhere there are P-51s. Noak catches a glimpse of another dogfight 1,000 metres below, a Bf-109 in a desperate dive with 2 Mustangs in pursuit. He watches the German fighter pull up hard, trying to use the 109's excellent climb rate to escape. One of the P-51s follows easily, matching the climb, getting into firing position. Cannon fire sparkles from the Mustang's wings. The Bf-109 staggers, pieces flying off the fuselage. Black smoke streams from the engine. The German fighter rolls over and begins a long, tumbling fall toward the ground far below. Noak doesn't see if the pilot gets out. He's got his own problems. The P-51 on his tail has closed to 400 metres. Any second now, the American will be in firing range. Noak needs to do something, anything, to break this geometry. He chops his throttle and extends his flaps, a desperate manoeuvre that kills his speed instantly. The idea is that the American will overshoot, fly past him, and Noak can reverse the pursuit. It almost works. The P-51 starts to slide forward, the American pilot caught off guard by the sudden deceleration. But instead of continuing past, the Mustang pilot rolls inverted and pulls away in a steep climb, maintaining separation, refusing to give Noak the reversal he needs. Professional flying, disciplined. This American knows exactly what he's doing. Noak retracts his flaps, advances throttle, and dives away. He's not running, not exactly, but he's breaking contact. The fight is going nowhere. He's burning fuel he can't spare, and the tactical situation is deteriorating by the second. The P-51 doesn't pursue. The American has other bombers to protect. Noak levels out at 20,000 feet, scanning for Bauer. There, 2 kilometres south, also withdrawing from the fight. His wingman's aircraft looks intact. Bauer, status? Undamaged, Herr Oberleutnant, low on fuel. Those Mustangs are... Bauer doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. Noak looks back toward the bomber formation. The B-17s are continuing toward their target, formation still intact. The P-51s are back in position, circling protectively. The entire engagement, which felt like an eternity, has taken less than 8 minutes. The bombers haven't even deviated from their course. The American formation looks undisturbed, professional, in control. German fighters are scattered across 50 miles of sky, disorganized, many damaged, some trailing smoke on their way down. Noak's radio continues its grim litany. Hauptmann Richter is down. Saw his shoot. I'm hit returning to base. My wingman just went in. Didn't see a shoot. They're still over the city. The escorts are still here. That last transmission carries an edge of panic that Noak has never heard before in Luftwaffe radio discipline. Someone's voice cracking with the realization of what this means. He checks his fuel gauge again. Time to head home. He's accomplished nothing except learning that P-51 Mustangs can indeed reach Berlin, can indeed fight over the German capital, and can indeed dominate the airspace they occupy. As Noak turns west toward his base, he watches the American formation continue toward its target. Untouchable, protected by fighters that shouldn't exist, flying a mission that should be impossible. 2:17 p.m., 25 minutes after first contact. The bombers reach their target, industrial areas in eastern Berlin. Noka watches from 20 kilometers away as the bombs fall, tiny black specks that detach from the bomber formations and tumble toward the city below. Seconds later, explosions blossom across the landscape. Orange flashes followed by columns of dark smoke. The P-51s remain in position throughout the bomb run. They're not conserving fuel. They're not preparing to depart. They're flying combat air patrol like they have all the time in the world. Noak's engineering mind can't reconcile it. He's watching an impossibility continue to be impossible, minute after minute. These aircraft should be at the absolute limit of their range. They should be turning back, worried about fuel, conserving every drop for the long flight home. Instead, they're loitering, fighting, dominating. A new voice comes over the radio, older, authoritative. Probably a squadron commander. All fighters, disengage and return to base. Repeat, disengage. We cannot contest this airspace today. Cannot contest this airspace over Berlin, over the German capital. Noak has never heard such an admission before. German fighters always contested their own airspace. Always. The Luftwaffe had been pushed back from France, from North Africa, from Russia, but over Germany itself they fought. They had to. But you can't fight what you can't catch, can't defeat what you can't outlast. The impossible has rules of its own. As Noak turns for home, fuel gauge dropping toward reserve, he tries to calculate how the Americans did it. What technology, what innovation, what secret allowed them to break the laws of physics that everyone else followed? The answer is simple, though Noak doesn't know it yet. They didn't break the laws of physics. They just engineered around them. Better fuel efficiency, larger tanks, drop tanks for extended range, and the courage to fly 600 miles into enemy territory, trusting that the mathematics would hold. The mathematics did hold. Berlin, untouchable fortress protected by distance, has just fallen. Not to guns or bombs, but to fuel capacity and engineering excellence. The pattern that never failed has failed. And Heinz Knoke, flying home in his Bf 109 with 17 victories to his name, knows with absolute certainty that everything has changed. The war just shifted. Germany just lost. He saw it happen at 24,000 feet above Berlin, in a sky full of impossible silver fighters. March 4th, 1944. 4:35 p.m. Luftwaffe Airfield, Verneuchen, 25 kilometers northeast of Berlin. Heinz Knoke's Bf 109 touches down on the grass runway, tailwheel settling with a gentle thump. He's been flying for 2 hours and 40 minutes. His hands are stiff from gripping the control stick. His back aches from the G-forces, and his mind is still processing what he witnessed. He taxis to the dispersal area where ground crew are already waiting. They read pilots' faces when they return. Today, they see something that makes them nervous. Noak climbs out of the cockpit, pulls off his leather helmet, and breathes air that isn't bottled oxygen. The March afternoon is cold, but feels warm compared to the killing freeze at 24,000 feet. His legs are unsteady. They always are after a combat mission. And he leans against the fuselage for a moment. A ground crew sergeant approaches. Herr Oberleutnant, are you hit? Do you need medical? Knoke shakes his head. The aircraft is fine. I'm fine. But he's not fine. Nothing is fine. He looks across the airfield. Of the 12 aircraft from his squadron that scrambled 2 hours ago, he counts 8 that have returned so far. As he watches, a 9th comes in. Bf-109 with visible damage to the tail section, flying slightly askew. The pilot manages a decent landing despite the damage. 8, 9. Where are the other 3? The squadron's intelligence officer, Lieutenant Werner, hurries across the grass with a clipboard. He always has a clipboard. The bureaucracy of warfare demands documentation, even when the world is ending. Oberleutnant Knoke, I need your combat report. Knoke gives the bare facts. Time of contact, altitude, enemy aircraft encountered, weapons fired, results observed. His voice is flat, mechanical. Werner scribbles notes. Did you engage the bombers? Attempted, was intercepted by P-51 escort. Over Berlin, you're certain they were P-51s? Positive identification, Mustangs, multiple aircraft, flying combat air patrol over the city. Werner's pen pauses. Over the city itself? Over the city, over the target. They had fuel for sustained combat. They weren't conserving, weren't preparing to depart. They owned that airspace. Werner writes this down, but Knoke can see the scepticism in his face. The intelligence officer thinks Knoke is exaggerating or misidentified the aircraft or is confused from combat stress. They'll believe soon enough. Other pilots are landing now, returning in 1s and 2s. Knoke watches a Bf-109 come in too fast, bounce on the grass, settle roughly. The pilot is either wounded or rattled, possibly both. By 5 p.m. the tally is complete for Knoke's squadron. 9 aircraft returned, 3 missing. 1 pilot made it back, but his aircraft is so badly damaged it will take weeks to repair. Effectively, a loss. 3 pilots dead or captured, 1 aircraft destroyed on the ground equivalent. 4 total losses from a 12-aircraft scramble, a 33% loss rate in a single mission. This is unsustainable mathematics. You cannot lose 1/3 of your force in every engagement and continue operating. The numbers are brutally simple. 3 missions at this rate and the squadron ceases to exist. But Knoke's squadron isn't the only one that scrambled. March 4th, 1944. 6:20 p.m. Luftwaffe Fighter Command Headquarters. The reports flow in from airfields across northern Germany. Squadron after squadron filing combat reports. The numbers accumulate. JG-1, Fighter Wing 1, 7 aircraft lost, 4 damaged. JG-3, 5 aircraft lost, 3 damaged. JG-11, 6 aircraft lost, 5 damaged. JG-26, 4 aircraft lost, 2 damaged. The clerks tally the numbers with growing horror. This isn't how the pattern usually works. German fighters typically attack unescorted bombers, suffer moderate losses, inflict heavy damage, return home with a favourable kill ratio. Today's numbers are inverted. Preliminary estimates: 38 German fighters destroyed or missing. Another 23 damaged, many severely. Against this, the Americans lost 11 bombers and 5 fighters. The kill ratio is wrong. Backwards. The Germans are losing nearly 4 aircraft for every 1 American loss. And the American bombers completed their mission, hit their targets, flew home with their P-51 escorts still in formation. Someone will have to brief Adolf Galland. No one wants that assignment. March 5th, 1944. Morning briefing. The numbers from March 4 are confirmed and refined. 38 German fighters definitely lost. 53 total, including damaged aircraft that won't fly again. Against 16 American losses total. Galland reads the report in silence. His face reveals nothing, but everyone in the room can feel the temperature drop. P-51s over Berlin, he says finally. Multiple squadrons reported this? Yes, Herr General. Positive identification from at least 20 pilots. They weren't short-range penetrations. The escorts remained over the target area for the duration of the bombing run. Galland looks at the intelligence assessments from previous weeks, the ones that said this was impossible, the engineering analysis, the fuel calculations. All wrong. Not slightly wrong. Catastrophically wrong. The Americans haven't just improved their fighter range incrementally. They've made a quantum leap. They've solved a problem that German intelligence said was unsolvable. What's the status for today's operations? Galland asks. Another major raid is forming over England. Early indicators suggest Berlin again as probable target. And we assume they'll have the same escort capability? Silence. Of course they will. Why wouldn't they? Yesterday proved it works. Galland makes a decision. All fighter wings are to engage only under favourable conditions. Do not pursue extended combat with the escorts. Our priority is to preserve our fighter force. It's a defensive order, a retreat order, though no one uses that word. For 2 years, the Luftwaffe has attacked American bomber formations aggressively, pressing attacks despite losses, trading blood for blood. Now Galland is telling his fighters to be cautious, to avoid combat when the odds are unfavourable. Because the odds are now always unfavourable. March 6, 1944. The Americans come back. Massive formation, 700-plus bombers, escort all the way to the target and back. German fighters engage cautiously, trying to pick off stragglers, looking for isolated targets. The P-51s are everywhere, aggressive, confident. Every German attack is met by American fighters who have fuel to chase, fuel to fight, fuel to dominate. The day's tally is even worse than March 4th, 69 German fighters destroyed, 11 American aircraft lost, a 6-to-1 kill ratio in favour of the Americans. 6-to-1. The mathematics are no longer unsustainable, they're apocalyptic. At this rate, the Luftwaffe will be bled white in weeks. The reports reach Galland's desk that evening. He reads them, then writes in his diary, a passage that will become famous after the war. The day I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up. 10 words that summarise the strategic collapse of German air defence. The jig is up. The game is over. The mathematics have changed, and the new mathematics are written in blood and burning aircraft. Heinz Knock, reading the loss reports for March 6th, does his own calculations. He knows most of these pilots. Hauptmann Richter, 38 victories, dead. Lieutenant Friest, 22 victories, missing. Feldwebel Strauss, 15 victories, crashed on landing with fatal injuries. Germany is losing experienced fighter pilots faster than novices can be trained. Each loss is irreplaceable expertise, irreplaceable skill, irreplaceable combat wisdom. And the Americans? They have factories producing hundreds of P-51s every month. They have pilot training programs graduating thousands of aviators. They have fuel reserves that allow fighters to fly 300-mile missions. They have everything Germany doesn't have. Knock closes the casualty report and stares at the wall of his quarters. He's 22 years old. He's survived 2 years of combat. He has 17 victories. And he knows, with the cold certainty of the engineering student he once was, that the numbers don't lie. Germany has lost air superiority, not temporarily, not in one sector, permanently, everywhere. The impossible appeared over Berlin on March 4th, and it destroyed everything. March 8, 1944. Luftwaffe, High Command, Wildparkwerder, outside Berlin. The conference room is thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Adolf Galland sits at the head of the table, surrounded by senior officers, intelligence analysts, and operational commanders. On the wall behind him, a large map of Europe is covered with coloured pins marking fighter bases, radar stations, and recent engagement locations. The pins over Berlin are clustered so densely they overlap. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring is not present. This is both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because Göring's volatile temperament and detachment from reality make productive meetings impossible. A curse because without him, no major strategic changes can be authorised. But Galland has called this meeting anyway. Some things can't wait for bureaucratic approval. Gentlemen, he begins, in the past 4 days we have lost 162 fighters. In that same period, American losses total 38 aircraft, This represents a kill ratio of 4.3 to 1 against us. He lets that number hang in the air. An officer speaks up. Major Spect, Operations Planning. Herr General, these figures are certainly concerning, but we've weathered heavy losses before. Our pilots remain the finest in the world. Perhaps we need to adjust our tactical approach. The problem is not tactical, Galland interrupts. His voice is quiet, but carries an edge that silences the room. The problem is strategic, fundamental. The entire basis of our air defense doctrine has been invalidated. He stands, walks to the map, places his finger on London, then traces a line east to Berlin. Our strategy was predicated on one absolute fact. American fighters could not reach this far. We calculated their combat radius. We knew that Berlin was beyond their range. Our entire defensive posture was built on this certainty. His finger taps Berlin. That certainty no longer exists. The P-51 Mustang has a combat radius exceeding 650 miles. It can escort bombers to any target in Germany. There is no safe distance anymore, no unescorted zone, no place where we can attack bombers without fighting through a screen of enemy fighters that are, frankly, superior to what we can field in adequate numbers. The intelligence officer, Oberst Bauer, clears his throat nervously. Herr General, if I may, our analysis suggests that while the P-51 has impressive range, it achieves this by sacrificing other performance parameters. Our pilots report that in individual combat, the P-51 can outturn, outclimb and outrun the Bf-109 in most regimes, Galland says flatly. I've read every combat report from the past week. The Mustang is not a compromise aircraft. It is genuinely superior in nearly every metric that matters, and it has more than double our fighters' combat radius. He returns to his seat, lights another cigarette. But even if the P-51 were merely equal to our fighters, we would still face an impossible situation. The Americans can afford to trade aircraft one for one. We cannot. They produce more fighters in a month than we produce in 6 months. They graduate more pilots from training than we can replace from combat losses. Major Specht tries again. Surely we can develop countermeasures. Our jet fighter program. The Me-262 is months away from operational deployment, perhaps years. And even when it arrives, we won't have fuel to fly it in meaningful numbers. The Americans are systematically destroying our synthetic fuel production. Galland takes a long drag on his cigarette, and for a moment, everyone in the room can see the weight. He's 32 years old. He looks 50. Gentlemen, I am going to say something that cannot leave this room, but which must be said. We have lost air superiority over Germany, permanently. The mission of this command is no longer to defend German airspace. That is now impossible. Our mission is to preserve enough combat capability to make the Americans pay a price, to slow them, to make every mile costly. The room is silent. Someone has to say it. Are you suggesting we cannot win the air war? Galland looks at the officer, a young captain, relatively new to headquarters staff, still clinging to the possibility of victory. I am stating a mathematical fact, Galland says. We are losing fighters and pilots 4 times faster than the enemy. Our production cannot match theirs. Our fuel reserves are being systematically destroyed. And now the Americans can escort their bombers anywhere in Reich airspace. He stubs out his cigarette. The day I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up. Our defensive strategy is finished. The Americans can now protect their bombers anywhere in Germany. We can still fight. We will fight. But we cannot win. The words fall like stones into still water. No one argues. How do you argue with mathematics? Major Specht finally asks the operational question. What are your orders, Herr General? Galland opens a folder, distributes typed pages around the table. New tactical directives. First, fighters are to engage only under favourable conditions. No heroic sacrifices. No pressing home attacks through superior enemy fighter screens. Preserve our experienced pilots at all costs. Second, priority targeting shifts from bombers to escort fighters. We cannot stop the bombing, but we can try to attrit their escort capability. Third, increased use of hit-and-run tactics. Attack, disengage, disperse. No sustained dogfights over Berlin, where they have fuel advantage and numerical superiority. He pauses. These are defensive measures, delaying tactics. They will slow our defeat, not prevent it. Oberstbauer speaks carefully. Herr General, what will you tell the Reichsmarschall? Galland's smile is bitter. I will tell him what he wants to hear, that our brave fighter pilots continue to defend the fatherland with skill and dedication. I will give him inflated victory claims and minimized loss reports. I will assure him that new tactics and new aircraft will turn the tide. And the truth? The truth is not welcome at higher headquarters. The truth is that we are watching the slow-motion destruction of the Luftwaffe, and there is nothing we can do to stop it. The Americans solved a problem we thought was unsolvable, and that solution has changed everything. Galland stands, signalling the meeting's end. Execute the new directives. Preserve your pilots. Make the enemy pay for every mile. That is all we can do now. As the officers file out, Galland remains behind, staring at the map, at the pins marking fighter bases across Germany, at the red line showing American bomber routes that now extend across the entire Reich. He thinks about the young pilots he's sending into unwinnable fights, about the aircraft factories that can't produce fast enough, about the fuel depots burning under American bombs, about silver P-51 Mustangs circling over Berlin like they own the sky. Because they do own it. The impossible became real on March 4, 1944. And Adolf Galland, 104 victories, youngest general in the Luftwaffe, architect of German air defense, knows exactly what it means. The jig is up. April 1944. The mathematics of attrition grind forward with merciless precision. Every day the weather permits, American bombers cross into German airspace, and every day P-51 Mustangs fly with them, all the way to the target, all the way home. The missions that seemed impossible in February are now routine in April. The targets tell the story of Germany's slow strangulation. Aircraft factories in Augsburg, ball-bearing plants in Schweinfurt, oil refineries in Ploesti, marshalling yards in Munich, synthetic fuel plants across the Ruhr Valley. The Americans are methodically destroying the industrial infrastructure that keeps Germany's war machine running, and German fighters can no longer stop them. Heinz Knoke flies mission after mission through April and into May. His victory count inches upward, 20 victories by mid-April, 23 by early May. But the numbers that matter are going the wrong way. His diary entries from this period are increasingly grim. April 15th, lost Becker today. 28 victories, best pilot in the squadron. Shot down by a Mustang over Magdeburg. No parachute observed. April 22nd, 3 more pilots gone. The replacements they send us now have barely 40 hours in type. They last 1, maybe 2 missions before they're killed. I don't bother learning their names anymore. May 8th, fuel shortage. We sat on the ground today while bombers hit the synthetic plant at Mersburg. Sat on the ground and watched them. We had fighters, we had pilots. We had no fuel to fly them. This is the cascade that Galland predicted. The P-51s enable deeper bomber penetrations. Deeper penetrations destroy fuel production. Reduced fuel production limits German fighter operations. Limited fighter operations allow even more successful bombing raids. A death spiral, mathematically inevitable once it begins. By late May 1944, Luftwaffe pilot losses exceed 2,500 per month. Not aircraft, pilots. The irreplaceable human expertise that takes years to develop and minutes to destroy. The training pipeline cannot keep pace. In 1942, German fighter pilots received 240 hours of training before their first combat mission. By mid-1944, that number has dropped to 110 hours. Some pilots arrive at frontline squadrons with barely 50 hours total flight time. American pilots, by contrast, receive 400-plus hours of training before combat deployment. The kill ratios reflect this experience. Gap. By May 1944, the ratio stabilizes at approximately 5:1 in favor of the Americans. For every P-51 shot down, 5 German fighters are destroyed. You cannot sustain a 5.1 loss ratio. The mathematics are brutal and absolute. June 6, 1944. D-Day. Allied forces land on the beaches of Normandy under an umbrella of absolute air superiority. The Luftwaffe manages exactly 319 sorties on D-Day against over 14,000 Allied sorties. 319 versus 14,000. German commanders desperately try to move reinforcements to Normandy. Panzer divisions that could potentially throw the invasion back into the sea are ordered to the front. They never arrive. Allied fighter bombers, including P-51s flying ground attack missions, strafe every road, every rail line, every bridge. German armoured columns that would be unstoppable in battle are destroyed piece by piece on the roads to Normandy, unable to move in daylight without being massacred from the air. The 12th SS Panzer Division, stationed 120 miles from the beaches, takes 17 days to reach the front line. Under normal conditions, it would take 2 days. It's death by 1,000 cuts, all delivered from the air, all enabled by the air superiority that began on March 4, 1944, when P-51s first appeared over Berlin. Heinz Knoke is not at Normandy. He's over Germany, flying increasingly desperate missions to defend targets that cannot be defended. His diary entry for June 6th is a single sentence. The invasion has begun. We could do nothing to stop it. Summer 1944. The strategic bombing campaign, freed from the constraint of escort range, intensifies. No target is beyond reach. The Americans hit oil refineries, aircraft factories, rail yards, communication centres. They fly missions to Poland, to Austria, to Czechoslovakia, to southern Germany, to targets that were completely safe from daylight precision bombing just 6 months earlier. By August 1944, German aviation fuel production has dropped to 10% of January levels. Luftwaffe training units literally cannot fly. There's no fuel for training flights. New pilots arrive at combat squadrons with textbook knowledge and almost no practical experience. They die in huge numbers. The statistics from summer 1944 are almost incomprehensible. May 1944, 2,562 Luftwaffe pilots killed, wounded or missing. June 1944, 2,127 pilots lost. July 1944, 3,213 pilots lost. August 1944, 3,548 pilots lost. In 4 months, Germany loses over 12,000 fighter pilots. That's the equivalent of the entire fighter pilot force being wiped out and replaced 3 times over. You cannot lose 12,000 pilots in 4 months and maintain any kind of effective air force. The mathematics don't allow it. By September 1944, the Luftwaffe still has aircraft. Germany is producing fighters at a remarkable rate, even under sustained bombing. But aircraft without pilots are just expensive sculptures. Aircraft without fuel are lawn ornaments. And Germany has neither enough pilots nor enough fuel. The cascading effects reach every corner of the war. Eastern Front. German ground forces, previously supported by Luftwaffe close air support, are now operating without air cover while facing overwhelming Soviet air superiority. Transportation infrastructure. German rail networks, bombed relentlessly by American daylight raids and British night raids, can no longer move supplies efficiently. Food, ammunition, fuel, troops, everything moves slowly or not at all. Industrial production. Factories are destroyed or damaged. Even undamaged factories cannot operate efficiently when workers spend hours per day in air raid shelters. Oil crisis. synthetic fuel production collapses. By September 1944, the Wehrmacht is rationing fuel for basic defensive operations. Offensive operations are impossible. There's no fuel for them. All of this, every bit of it, traces back to a single technological advantage: the P-51 Mustang's ability to escort bombers beyond what German planners thought possible. One aircraft, one engineering solution, one impossible achievement that changed everything. Heinz Knoke flies his last combat mission on December 2, 1944. He has 33 confirmed victories by then. He's survived nearly 3 years of continuous combat, an almost miraculous achievement given the loss rates, but he's also watched his entire squadron be destroyed and rebuilt 4 times over. He's seen pilots with 40 victories die on routine patrols. He's flown missions where his flight of 4 fighters faced 40 American P-51s. He's fought the mathematically unwinnable fight for 9 months since that day in March when he saw the impossible over Berlin. By December 1944, there's barely any fight left to wage. The Luftwaffe still exists on paper, still has aircraft, still has a few experienced pilots like Knoke. But German airspace belongs to the Allies now. The jig has been up for months. Everyone knows it, even if no one will say it aloud. May 8, 1945. Germany surrenders. The war in Europe ends not with a dramatic final battle, but with exhaustion and mathematical inevitability. Germany has run out of fuel, out of aircraft, out of pilots, out of options. The Luftwaffe that once terrorized Europe is a shadow. In the final months of the war, German fighters barely contest Allied air operations. The skies over Germany belong to American and British aircraft so completely that Allied pilots joke about milk runs. Missions so safe, they're boring. This wasn't inevitable. In early 1944, Germany still fielded a formidable air force, experienced pilots, quality aircraft, strong defensive positions. Then P-51 Mustangs appeared over Berlin on March 4, 1944. And the equation changed. The men, Heinz Knoke, survives the war. He's one of the lucky ones. Fewer than 1/500 of the 28,000 German fighter pilots who fought in World War II lived to see peace. He ends the war with 33 confirmed victories, a survivor of over 400 combat missions. In the years after the war, Knoke writes his memoirs, I Flew, for the Führer, a remarkably honest account of the air war from the German perspective. In it, he describes that moment on March 4, 1944, when he first saw P-51s over Berlin. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. American fighters over Berlin. It was impossible. We knew their combat radius, yet there they were, P-51s flying circles around the bomber formations as if they had unlimited fuel. In that moment, I knew we'd lost. Knoke dies in 1993, age 71. He lived to see Germany rebuild, to see the Cold War begin and end, to see the world transformed. But he never forgot that March afternoon when the impossible became real. Adolf Galland's story is more complicated. His honest assessments of Germany's deteriorating air situation made him enemies at high command. In January 1945, after months of conflict with Göring and other Nazi leadership, Galland was relieved of his command position. But he didn't stop fighting. In his final act of defiance, Galland formed JV-44, an elite unit flying the revolutionary Me-262 jet fighter. He handpicked experienced pilots, including several who'd been grounded for speaking uncomfortable truths about Germany's situation. They flew the world's first operational jet fighter in combat, a technological marvel that arrived far too late to matter. Galland survived the war, surrendered to American forces, and later wrote extensively about aerial warfare. His quote became famous, "The day I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." He died in 1996, age 83, widely respected as one of history's greatest fighter tacticians. Both men, enemies of the Allied cause, nevertheless recognized and documented the moment when technology shifted the balance of power irrevocably. The aircraft, the P-51 Mustang, became legendary. Over 15,000 were produced during the war. They served in every theatre, achieved air superiority wherever they operated, and earned a reputation as perhaps the finest fighter aircraft of World War II. But the P-51's real achievement wasn't its speed or firepower or manoeuvrability, excellent as those were. Its achievement was range. The ability to go where no fighter had gone before, to protect bombers all the way to the target and back, to make distance irrelevant. That capability, born from British engine technology, American manufacturing, and brilliant engineering, enabled everything that followed. The systematic destruction of German industry, the oil campaign that crippled German mobility, the air superiority that made D-Day possible, the fighter sweeps that hunted down and destroyed the Luftwaffe on the ground and in the air. Strategic bombing worked in 1944-45, not because American bombers were invulnerable, but because P-51 escorts made them survivable. The lesson: wars are won by those who change the equation. In March 1944, the equation was simple. Berlin was 600 miles from England, and American fighters couldn't fly that far. It was a mathematical certainty, confirmed by intelligence analysis and combat experience. Then the equation changed, not through courage or determination, though those mattered, not through superior strategy, though that helped. The equation changed through engineering, through someone looking at an impossible problem and finding a solution no one thought existed. A British engine in an American airframe, drop tanks for extended range, careful fuel management, the courage to trust the mathematics and fly 600 miles into enemy territory. These weren't magical innovations. They were practical solutions to engineering challenges, but their impact was revolutionary. On March 3, 1944, Berlin was untouchable by escorted American bombers. On March 4, 1944, Berlin was just another target. The same distance, the same city, the same enemy, but different mathematics. And mathematics, in the end, decide wars. March 4, 1944. A date most people don't know. A battle with no dramatic name. A moment that changed history without fanfare or ceremony. German pilots scrambled that afternoon expecting routine, expecting the pattern that never failed, expecting the laws of physics to protect them. Instead, they saw silver Mustangs writing vapor trails across the sky above Berlin. They saw the impossible made real. They saw the future and understood immediately that it didn't include German air superiority. Heinz Knock knew it watching those P-51s circle with fuel to spare. Adolf Galland knew it when the loss reports reached his desk. Every German pilot who flew that day knew it, though some couldn't articulate why. The war continued for another 14 months. Millions more would die. Cities would burn. Armies would clash. But the outcome was decided on March 4, 1944, in the cold air 24,000 feet above Berlin, when the impossible appeared and changed everything. The day German pilots saw P-51s over Berlin and knew they'd lost.